You see our society, America, becoming more rational or more superstitious?
Oh boy. Could you give me about 4 hours on this? I want it to become more rational, but I would not place any of my hard-earned money on that outcome. I went to the trouble to write that book I mentioned, Dumped in 81 Ways to Make Americans Smarter. In fact, I've done a number of things professionally over, I don't know, 30 or 40 years because of that one concern and that one aim to help. One other example was a television series called Meeting of Minds, in which, by bringing together 3 or 4 at a time some of the most influential people in history, representing all possible kinds of philosophical opinion, I attempted to give, and did give, an example of civilized discourse about major issues designed to make the viewer think. Another instance was a table game called Strange Bedfellows. It was a matter of matching up quotations with the people who said them or wrote them. Then there was a record album, which is still selling. It's now in cassette form with a little accompanying booklet called How to Think. It's aimed at children from 5 to 15, let's say, and it talks about their brain. It tells them that we are the thinking animal, the others are the swinging from trees animals or the flying animals and so forth. We are supposed to be the thinkers, and it talks about logic, of course, on a very basic level, has cute little jokes and songs, all designed to get children interested in thinking, in reasoning, in rationality. I've argued in this context that there should be a 4th R, reading, writing, arithmetic, and reasoning. And it should start at the kindergarten or 1st grade level. There are courses of formal instruction available now, but most of us don't even encounter them, hear about them till we're in the university. And by that time, the harm has been done. Even if you're pretty bright, you've already been damaged as a thinker, almost certainly, either by your sister, or your church, or your government, or your local newspaper, or your record company, whatever it is. So obviously my hopes are long-term. I don't see any short-term hope for improvement, whatever. It seems to be getting worse since my book came out, although there's no cause and effect there. There is something about the appeal of irrationality which has always eluded me. I'm not claiming that I thought this over at the age of 9 and decided to be less at fault than some of my associates. It's just like being born with brown eyes or the ability to go like that with your fingers or to play the piano or what have you. Those things are mysterious gifts. All gifts are mysterious. But we are going to have to make this a national issue, and I don't think anyone short of the president, any president, can do this. I think he actually has to rub our noses in our present predicament. We are not only occasionally irrational, all of us are now and then irrational. The emotions are at war, notoriously, with the intellect. There's the old saying, love is blind, and there's a sense in which that is true. But the reason it's true is because love is an emotion. All the emotions are blind. They are programmed to function on a level that is not that of the rational. If an animal is running at you in the jungle, that's no time for reasoning. You got to get the hell out of there. And so we are programmed with the emotion of fear, and fear pumps adrenaline, and we all know how that works. So you can run a little faster. But this is just, again, a quality control problem programmed into to humans by however the great process was accomplished.
In your book, Beloved Son, you write about your son's involvement in a group called the Church of Armageddon. How did you deal with that?
It came as a shock. What I mean by the word "it" was a letter from my son, who was already out in the world on his own as an adult, telling us, in effect, goodbye. It wasn't an angry letter. He didn't froth at the mouth or use harsh terms. But he said, in effect, dear Dad, I'm writing to tell you goodbye, and I'll explain why I'm telling you that. I'm saying goodbye to all the family, all my past, my old friends. I have found a new life and a new church, and it satisfies my spiritual needs. I'm not quoting him directly, but this was the gist of his message. And, of course, that would come as a shock to any family on earth. So I began to communicate with them. We were already, of course, in communication, but I began to pay very particular attention to a situation. At first, all doors were closed to the families of the members. A year or two later, they changed their minds. Churches do, too, change their minds. And they decided that it was okay to write an occasional letter or communicate. So I went up there when it was possible and visited. By up there, I mean in Seattle, where the cult was based, in the Queen Anne neighborhood. They had two names, which is interesting because the two names convey two totally different and possibly even mutually contradictory messages. One name is the Love Family. Sweet name. We all should have more love, and hooray for families. The Love Family. The other was the Church of Armageddon. Watch your step. So I guess that tells something about them. And the cults generally constitute a serious social problem involving no one knows how many people, millions certainly, but the arithmetic is hard to come by. There's a fairly common pattern where people come into the control of these groups, and after 5, 10, 12 years, they often drift away. Not always, but they often drift away. And it would be nice if we could save them that 12-year terrible waste, you know, and family suffering. But I guess they have to work their own way through it.
During that time period, Ted Patrick and deprogramming were constantly making the headlines. Do you have any particular thoughts about deprogramming?
Yeah, the separate issue, subsidiary issue of programming or deprogramming, whatever you want to call it, raises certain legal questions, certain moral questions, and it's important, first of all, to realize it is a separate issue. It's connected, because that is why people kidnap their children. Immediately when you use a sentence with the word kidnap and the phrase their children, I mean with the word kidnap and their children in it, it's not, immediately there's some ambiguity, some confusion there, because ordinarily we hear the word kidnap used as regards strangers' children and the holding for ransom and all that traditional form. But can one, in fact, kidnap one's own son or daughter? There are those who say, no, if it's your son or daughter, it's not kidnapping. It may be some other offense or annoyance, but it's not what we mean when we say kidnapping. People go to jail for kidnapping, or get put to death and so forth. So there is a moral distinction right there, as well as a bit of confusion. My personal opinion is that if Brian had been, say, 14 years old when he went in, I would have gone to the place and at least made the physical attempt to take him out. And if somebody objected to that, I guess I would have been a kidnapper, and I would have felt no guilt. But that has no relevance to the real situation, because he was well into his 20s when he left us, and he made his own decision as an adult. So I no longer had a legal right to do that sort of thing. But each family has made its own decision. So like all complex issues, this one ought to be studied by everyone, because I think it's everybody's problem. Now, there are those who say, why is it everybody's problem? My son or daughter never went in. Good for you, but they might tomorrow.
So how is your son doing now?
He's still up in Seattle, yes. Mm-hmm. He's in the real estate business there, and we're in frequent communication. And he's still the same marvelous guy he always was. But he now says, and he doesn't say it today, but I have heard him say it, quote, I wasted 11 years of my life in that group. It's good that he finally came to that realization, but I would hope his story could save other families and other young people that trouble.
You know, in spite of the polls regarding America's apparent support for what the BATF did in Waco, Texas, I'm finding it rather difficult to tell just exactly who is wearing the black hat and who is wearing the white hat situation.
Yeah. We're confused as a people about that particular social drama, partly because whether truth is stranger than fiction, we don't know or can argue, but it's much more disorganized. If you're the god of a little universe, you can decide what happens to the man when he hits the dog bites him, or whatever you want to have happen. You can even impose justice, and most stories have some justice to them. I could detect no energy, no mechanism of justice in the entire physical universe, except that when we encounter justice, it is almost always that imposed by humans. Humans set up a whole system called the legal system of laws, punishments, deterrence, all of that, very complex. But Mother Nature, or whatever else you want to call the great controller, seems to have no interest in justice whatever. So as regards this particular situation, one group, the cult group, were irrational. Common term on the streets, they were crazy. Koresh appears to have been crazy, religiously crazy, but that's a fairly common form. And therefore you cannot successfully reason. You can do a wonderful job of reasoning out of your mouth, but it falls on very infertile soil. It might have been better to try different experiments, to bring in another crazy person that says, no, hey, Koresh, cool it, I am God. You know, maybe he could have talked him into it. In fact, I once wrote a play based on that assumption, based on an actual case, I think in Michigan, where there were 3 men in a given psychiatric prison or hospital who were convinced that they were God. And my play brings them together. Tries to, a psychiatrist, in fact, dreams up this plan. They won't listen to him. He thinks maybe they will be influenced by each other, or at least their faith in their own abilities will be shaken by contact with 2 rivals. So there was no way that could end happily. There are abstract ways, as a writer or anyone sitting in a bus could have written a little story about a happy ending, but we have to deal with reality. And as long as you've got a bunch of religious wackos, and the FBI and the other groups are trying to talk sense to them, it's very unlikely to turn out right. If they had, kerosene and gasoline stockpiled inside and burned the place down, they did that. The FBI did not do that.
In hindsight, a lot of people are suggesting different things regarding this David Koresh incident. There is a theologian from the University of North Carolina who said that if the FBI would have allowed him to go in and talk to David Koresh and prove to him that the 7th seal did not apply to him, that this could have avoided bloodshed. There was also a woman who claimed to be with the Cult Awareness Network. I haven't established that yet. And she was faxing all sorts of material to the Clintons and the FBI, and she was trying to get permission for the parents to actually go into the compound, into the church, to talk with their various sons and daughters who were still under the leadership of David Koresh.
I don't think anybody argues that those who were shocked by Koresh's behavior, and he was a terrible man. We're not talking about some Che Guevara hero here who was trying to help the people, rightly or wrongly. He was just a terrible man, in addition to being nuts. But yeah, I think it would have been an opportunity to try various approaches, but the FBI and the other guys are not drawn from the psychiatric profession. They are policemen, and we need them. All societies need such police forces. So it's one of those situations concerning which you can never say, well, that's what happened, and this is right, and that's wrong, and now let's have lunch. There will always be doubts and second guesses. It was a sad situation.
Do you have any special concern about the religious right?
Oh, yes. Of course, I have concern about everything. Okay. The religious left. Keep an eye there.
Tell us about the right for a second.
Yeah. Well, the religious right, for the most part, this means there are exceptions, seems to be more emotionally motivated by political considerations than by spiritual or religious considerations. It's not an either-or, black or white situation. I'm not saying others are all religious and nobody should be political. No, there are serious political concerns, and every decent citizen should share those concerns. His recommended solutions, they will vary from case to case. But if you watch a clergyman on television or in his church who is admittedly, I mean, he's not apologetic about it, he's proud that he's a great American and he cares about family values and all that lovely stuff, and you really listen carefully to what he's saying, most of it is political. As contrasted, let's say, with the Reverend Bob Schuller, who talks sweetness and light and is much loved. The other fellows are not much loved, except by their more fanatical followers. Hitler, did not force his way into control of Germany. They got down on their knees and said, please come in and rule our country, would you? So the people who fall victim to the Hitlers and the Jim Jones and all the misguided leaders are always partly to blame. They can never say, oh, I was such a wonderful person until I fell under the control of that bum. And they never seem to say that. They somehow are longing that the bum will come back and do it again to them. Whoever made men should have talked to his vice president in charge of quality control. But there's endless complexity here. But there is danger in these cults. Sometimes, to refer again to the political factor hooked up with religion, if the guy is politically what we, depending on who we are, like to hear about and want to encourage, we'll put up with all kinds of nonsense. A classic instance is the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. This man says he has not come to remind us of Jesus Christ, or say, isn't Jesus Christ an ideal person? He says, he is Jesus Christ. Well, he's not, and nevertheless, many leading conservatives, including people in Mr. Reagan's White House, invited Mr. Moon to sit on the stand when Mr. Reagan was inaugurated, and this is only a group of maybe, I don't know, 100 people, whatever the number, who cares, small group. He was there, nut though he is, dangerous nut though he is. Why? Why would those brilliant Reagan advisors, and some of whom I know and some of whom were brilliant, why would they do such a shocking thing? Because he was anti-communist. Swell. Then they should have dug Hitler up and put him on the chair, because he was even more anti-communist. It's very discouraging sometimes. You sometimes respect your philosophical opponents because at least they seem to be people of principle, and then you run into an issue of this sort. Where is principle? Not too visible.
You've made a contribution to the anthology, The Book Your Church Does Not Want You to Read. In it, you wrote about women's rights, specifically abortion. In your study of the Bible, both the Old and the New Testament, does the Bible have anything specific to say about abortion?
Yes. I'm not one of those, by the way, although I've written these 2 volumes and have more in my mind about Scripture, I'm not one of those who is a memory freak and can cite 19 Bible verses, Mark 14:6, you know, that kind of thing. In fact, that always seemed a little comic or peculiar to me when I was a younger fellow. But, so I cannot, without consulting my own books, give you the citations, but the Bible does address the problem. It doesn't address it much, probably because in the period when the Scripture was written, abortion was not a common thing, as murder was. So there was a lot of talk about murder and a lot of other things that were common. But abortion really never became a front-page issue, a matter of heated public controversy, until quite recently. There were centuries and centuries during which abortion was simply illegal. That meant no woman, even if she were dying, could go to a hospital and say, give me an abortion or I will die. Because the churches, which were very powerful socially and legally, said no, and that's the end of it. In fact, there was hardly any discussion. It was just no, next case. Then the walls of that particular structure began to crumble, roughly speaking, 50 years ago, and little by little the debate crept out of the exchanges among the different churches and the different philosophical camps into our front pages, and now the matter is very heated. One point I make in, I can't remember whether it's volume 1 or volume 2, and it doesn't matter, since people should have both of them. I can't recall in which book I mentioned that for a long time the church, or the churches, some of them, said abortion is murder. That's the end of it. No more discussion. Then finally there were cases where somebody's own wife or daughter or mother or sister was going to die if she didn't get an abortion because of a background of serious physical problems. And then, as often happens in the cases of this sort, people began to make exceptions about their sister or their mother, and they rationalized that to their own satisfaction. And now even many people who are trying to either totally stop or limit abortion nevertheless concede that there have to be exceptions. In the case of rape, for example, where the poor woman doesn't want the child, and who knows what sort of a maniac the rapist was. There are those cases. There are others, as we've said, in the case of where the health and sometimes even the life of the mother is at stake. And in cases of incest, too. So these the few categories where even those who don't want abortions will grant exceptions. But one of the points I make is that if indeed we go back to our original assertion that abortion is murder, then there should be no such exceptions. Now, I happen to think personally that there should be, but I'm trying to make the arguers see the logical implications of their basic assertions. And I throw out the suggestion that the reason that the exceptions have been granted is that if they were not, you would never be able to outlaw abortion in this country. So it's probably a matter of political maneuvering rather than bedrock principle. There are, however, I suppose, a few people who are firm on that and say no abortions, and if some women die, that's tough. Life is tough. They're going to die, but we'll save the life of that baby, even if nobody on earth wants it.
In an MTV special about censorship, they gave a soundbite of you saying, well, of course we need censorship, but I don't recall if they ever actually gave you time to elaborate on that. So I'd like to give you time to elaborate on it. Do we need censorship?
Sure, of course, I repeat, we need censorship, but we'll have to first decide what we mean by censorship. We already have censorship. They are called laws against libel and slander. That's one example of out-and-out censorship. You can't say certain stuff, folks, or if you do, you'll get arrested and put in jail. That is a form of censorship, and that form we need. Now, let's suppose you own a radio station somewhere, or a TV station, or a television network. Let's say you're running NBC, and somebody wants to book Andrew Dice Clay. He's a comedian who does mostly filth. And then he knows that, so I'm not criticizing him. I'm just pointing out that's like saying he has brown hair. He does filth, and he loves to do it, and he's proud of it. Are you really going to permit that on your network? You know you're not, because you know 7-year-old children are watching, and probably 80% of the nation will try to, scream your ears off if you do such a terrible thing. So you censor Mr. Clay, and good for you when you do. He's being censored right now. There's no network that'll touch him. He may get on a show now and then as a guest just to, cause controversy and up the points rating-wise a little bit. But when he appeared on that bastion of creative freedom, Saturday Night Live, they censored some of the words. You saw his mouth moving and the words had been censored out. So that's what I mean when I say, of course, we need some censorship. You should hold it to an absolute minimum. Ideally, there should be none. But as long as there are jerks who want to get on television and talk filth, you got to censor them. Very simple.
Most of what you're saying, though, seems to be personal censorship, like NBC probably taking the initiative and censoring what's going out on their network.
Oh, yeah. Advertisers censor, sponsors censor, network censor. We all say, in my house, I'm not going to permit people to come in and say anything they want, or, they may say it, but I'll say, please step outside. That's a form of censorship. Now, if you're talking about legal censorship,
right.
Well, there already is that, as I mentioned earlier. We have the laws against libel and slander. There is legislation now on the subject of hate crimes. To hit another person with a stick has always been a terrible thing, but to hit him because he's Armenian or black or Catholic or whatever, there's more to that than just hitting him with the stick. That's obvious, I think. And there now are legal remedies to apply to cases of stick hitting done because of what the individual that gets hit is, either ethically, racially, religiously, philosophically, or whatever. It's a special kind of more objectionable crime. And in making such laws, we are censoring. All law, in a certain sense, is an attempt to prevent, to deter certain kinds of behavior, sometimes relatively minor, like going 55 in a 50-mile zone, other times major, like trying to prevent the killing of 40 million people, such as happened in World War II.
Steve Allen has written a couple of books I'd like to bring to your attention. One is Steve Allen on the Bible, Religion, and Morality. And then there's a sequel to this book called, believe it or not, more Steve Allen on the Bible, Religion, and Morality. Why a sequel to the Bible, Religion, and Morality?
The reason was that I wrote so much when I was doing the original work. At that time, I had never totally planned the structure of what I was doing, it started, as come to think of it, most of my books do, without the realization in my mind that I was writing a book. I was simply thinking aloud and then thinking on paper. And in a number of instances over the years, I suddenly notice I have 212 pages of whatever it is. And I think, oh, this could be a book. And at that point, we start getting in touch with publishers. So that's how it was in this instance. The subject matter, of course, is Scripture. As an entertainer, I travel a lot, and many a night I would find the Gideon Bible in the little drawer next to the bed and spend 30 or 40 minutes going through it. And at the beginning, and this goes back about 20 years, I began to notice that what I was reading was markedly different, not just a little different, but strikingly different from the perception of Scripture that I had picked up in my training as a Catholic, a young fellow. And that attracted my attention, and then I began to dictate my responses. I do all my writing with dictation equipment. And pretty soon, as I say, by that process, I had a lot of comments. So several years ago, I showed them to the folks at Prometheus, the publishers, Mr. Kurtz and his associates, and they had a marvelous idea. I had originally thought I might do an analysis of the entire Bible, but that probably would have taken about literally 20 volumes in itself. So it was, however philosophically sensible, it was practically not too hip. So Paul brought out the first volume, and then there was more than enough left over to comprise the second.
You know, I read in book 1 that you had some very interesting things to say about humanists, and maybe you said them in book 2 more, Steve Allen, but you had some very glowing things to say about humanists. I'd like to start out by asking, do you consider yourself to be a humanist?
Yeah, I have been described as a Christian humanist. I'm not an atheist, so I'm not a secular humanist. Although some of my views are consistent with those of the secular humanists, I sometimes think that some of my views are consistent with almost every philosophical camp on earth, since I have literally friends in almost all camps. I hasten to add the word almost, because there are some people who are too far out or too evil or too mistaken for my taste. But yeah, there have actually been Christian humanists. Well, Thomas More is a classic example, and if he was good enough to become a saint, he's a lot better man than I am. So the classic question, perhaps the most fundamental question, is there or is not a God, has simply never been settled. To whose satisfaction would it be settled? It's been settled to the satisfaction of hundreds of millions, and not to the satisfaction of many others. So when I say that it hasn't been settled, what I mean is the debate is still going on. There are some questions perhaps which have been resolved, but that is simply not one of them. And that is true whether there is or is not a God. It actually says nothing about the reality. It's just about the debate on the question.
You speak to a variety of different groups. Some of them seem to be maybe contradictory to each other. What happens sometimes when you're at a group and somebody comes up to you and tries to pigeonhole you by asking, oh, wait a minute, are you a Christian? Are you an atheist? Come on, Steve, what are you? What do you do in those kind of situations?
They don't seem to do that very often, perhaps because they're generally familiar with the breadth of my views. I assume certain things. I know other things, and there perhaps are a few things in which it could be said I believe. Many people, I think, are not clear about the distinction in meaning between the word belief and the word knowledge, or the word believe and know. We would never say, I have great faith that 2 and 2 are 4. We absolutely know that that is a correct statement. So to bring belief into it would be to talk nonsense. But on things that we assume are the case, it's safe to say that we assume it, and we act on the basis of that assumption. Perhaps you have to act on some basis. But that is still distinct from knowing, and we just don't know. It would be a much simpler question if there were, pardon me, only one church or one form of religious belief. But as we know, there are thousands. No one even knows how many, because the number grows every week. 2 or 3 churches disappear and about 7 new ones pop up. So again, if people looked at Scripture and drew one large set of conclusions on the basis of their study of it, we could at least be quite clear as to what we mean in the use of certain common terms. But that is not the field as it is laid out. There are thousands of forms of Christianity, and from time to time they get so excited they put each other to death, which isn't too happy a picture.